Get ready for a clash of titans. It's Paul Morphy versus Adolf Anderssen, two of the greatest attacking players of the 19th century, battling it out in the legendary Evans Gambit. We open with a classic Italian game, but Morphy immediately spices things up with pawn to b4, the Evans Gambit. Black accepts the pawn sacrifice, and the battle begins. White builds a massive pawn center, pushing to e5. Black meets the challenge head-on, developing pieces and counter-striking in the center with pawn to d5. The position is electric. White develops the bishop to b5, pinning the knight. Black's knight hops into the advanced e4 outpost, and after white takes on d4, the stage is set. And here, black simply castles. A brilliant move. Anderssen sacrifices a knight to rip open lines and launch a furious attack against the white king. What a concept! Morphy accepts the challenge. The bishop takes the knight on c6, banking on his ability to defend against the coming storm. And this is the whole point. The pawn takes the bishop on c6. This is the only move opening the b-file for the rook and keeping black's incredible attack alive. White's queen swings over to a4, and after black's bishop retreats, she snaps up the pawn on c6. But black keeps the pressure on, developing the bishop to g4. White is under pressure and plays bishop to b2, but this is a serious inaccuracy. He had to be much more active to have a chance. The best defense was bishop to e3. After pawn to f5, knight to c3 develops a piece. Now pawn to f4 challenges black's control, and knight takes d5 actually wins a pawn for white. But in the game, Morphy plays the passive bishop to b2, and this allows black's attack to become overwhelming, and the punishment is immediate. The bishop takes the knight on f3, shattering white's kingside pawn shield. This looks so ugly, but pawn takes bishop on f3 is a fantastic defensive move, and in fact, it's the only one that keeps white in the game. Morphy finds the best chance. But black's attack is relentless. The knight jumps to g5, the rook joins the fight on e8, and the knight lands on h3. The white king is getting swarmed as the queen joins the party on h4. An inaccuracy from Morphy. The queen takes the pawn on d5, but this greedy move completely overlooks a devastating tactic from black. And there it is. The knight snaps the pawn on f2 with a royal fork. The king steps to g1, and the knight repositions to d3, now eyeing the bishop on b2. Here Anderssen plays, knight takes pawn on f4, which is an inaccuracy. He had a much stronger path to victory. The killer move was pawn to c5, attacking the center. After knight to c4, knight takes pawn on f4 is now much stronger. Queen to f3 and knight to h3 with check wins a clean pawn. Back in the actual game, black plays knight takes pawn on f4 directly, and this lets some of the advantage slip away. White's queen moves to f3 to defend. The knight checks again on h3, forcing the king to h1. The knight then hops back to g5, and after the queen's shuffle, black brings a rook to the d-file. White tries to generate threats on the g-file, but black's queen infiltrates, landing on h3 and creating all sorts of new problems for the exposed white king. And here comes the decisive blunder. Morphy plays queen to f3, a move that loses on the spot. He was facing a difficult position, but there was one way to fight on. The correct move was queen takes queen on h3, trading off the main attacker. After knight recaptures, rook to g4 puts pressure on the knight, rook to e6, and knight to b3 holds everything together for now. But that's not what happened. Instead, queen to f3 is played, and this walks right into a simple tactic that just wins a rook. But wait! A shocking twist. Anderssen plays queen to d7, a huge mistake that misses the crushing blow and lets Morphy completely off the hook. The winning move was knight takes queen on f3. After the knight recaptures, the king just sidesteps to h8. Pawn to a3 and queen to e6 attacks two pieces at once, winning a full rook. But Anderssen missed it. He plays queen to d7 instead, and while black is still better, the knockout punch has been missed. Morphy plays queen to g2, an inaccuracy. The best defense was to sacrifice the exchange with rook takes g5, but he misses it, allowing black another path to victory. And Anderssen finds it. Bishop takes the pawn on d4, another brilliant sacrifice. This move demolishes white's central pawn structure and pries open the position for the black queen. There's no choice. White's bishop takes the bishop on d4, but the damage is done. The queen recaptures on d4. A great move, and the only way to capitalize on the sacrifice, securing a completely winning advantage for black. White brings the knight to f3 for defense. Black's queen centralizes to d5, and white pushes the h-pawn, hoping to create some counterplay, and knight to e6, a fantastic retreating move that solidifies black's position and prepares for the final assault. Here's the idea. If queen to h3, rook to d7 defends. Queen to g4, and now the pawn pushes to c5, and black is completely dominant. The queens reposition. White's queen heads to g4, while black's queen eyes the long diagonal from c6. White brings a rook to g-ula to defend. Black's rook swings to d3. It's a strong move, but a slight inaccuracy that gives white a little bit of breathing room. White's queen shifts to f5, desperately trying to drum up some threats against the black king. And now a mistake from black. The other rook comes to d8, but this overlooks a nasty tactic that could have turned the tables. The safer move was rook to d7 first, king to g1, then rook to d8, king to h2, and the king sidesteps to h8, and black is perfectly safe. But instead, rook to d8 is played, and Morphy now has a chance to win a pawn with a check on f7. But he misses it. Morphy plays queen to f6, returning the favor with a mistake of his own and missing his golden opportunity. He had to play queen takes pawn on f7 with check. After the king takes, knight to d4 is a discovered check. The king moves to e8, and the knight takes the queen on c6, winning a crucial pawn. But Morphy missed his chance, playing queen to f6 instead, and black's winning advantage is restored. And Anderssen immediately takes advantage, bringing his queen back to the powerful d5 square. Another slip from white, the queen returns to f5, but this just allows black to start rolling forward on the queen side. Black's rook lands on d1, initiating a trade. This is strong, but pushing the c-pawn was an even more powerful idea. White has no choice but to trade, and the rook takes the rook on d1, and the queen recaptures on d1 with check. A fantastic move, the most precise way to convert this into a winning endgame. The king moves to h2. We're now in an endgame where black's pieces are far more active. The rooks and knights reposition for the final act. Black plays rook to e2, an inaccuracy that suddenly gives white some serious counter chances. The correct plan was king to h8, getting out of any potential checks. Knight to f1, and now the rook swings to a3, pawn to h5, and rook to a4, and black is in full control. Instead, with the move played, rook to e2 allows white a tactical shot to win the f7 pawn. And Morphy finds it. Queen takes the pawn on f7 with check. The king moves to h8, but white's knight jumps to e4. After a rook trade on f2, the position has simplified, but white is back in the game. Now begins a long sequence of checks. The black queen scoops up the pawn on a2, forcing the white king to g3, then back to h2, then back to g3, then back to h2 again. Perpetual check is in the air, but Anderssen has other ideas. He ends the checks and brings his queen to c6 to regroup. White pushes the h-pawn, creating a dangerous passed pawn. The black knight on g5 is a key defender, so after black's knight lands on f6, black is forced to capture it, allowing the white queen to recapture on f6 with check, and queen to g6 check, a fantastic move from Morphy, the only way to keep fighting, setting up the capture of the crucial h6 pawn. The king is forced to f8. White's queen takes the pawn on h6 with check, the king runs to e8, and another check on g6 follows. White now has a very dangerous passed pawn. The king steps to d7. A small inaccuracy that allows white's h-pawn to become an even bigger threat. White pushes the pawn to h6. This looks strong, but it's not the most precise, giving black a chance to organize a defense. Black's queen moves to d5, but this too is an inaccuracy. In this incredibly complex position, both players are missing the best moves, and now another slip from white. The pawn pushes to h7, but this allows a tactical shot that turns the tables completely. The stronger idea was queen to h7 check first, king to c6, queen to c2 check, king to b7, and queen to b2 check, keeping the king on the run. But in the game, the pawn rushes to h7, and this overlooks a critical resource for black. There it is. The queen takes the pawn on e5 with check, a stunning shot that wins a pawn and sets up the final attack. The white king is forced onto the back rank at g1, and now knight to g5. The third brilliant move of the game from Anderssen, he completely ignores the passed pawn on h7 to bring his last attacker into the game. Absolutely breathtaking. White promotes the pawn to a queen, but believe it or not, this is the final mistake. To have any chance, he had to find an incredible resource. The only move was to underpromote to a rook. After queen takes the rook on h8, queen takes the knight on g5. Queen to d4, check forces the king to f1. Black still wins, but this was the toughest defense. But Morphy chose to make a queen, and now black has a clear and easy path to victory. The finale is swift. Black's queen takes the new queen on h8. White's queen takes the knight, but a check on d4 forces the king to f1 into a hopeless position. Black pushes the a-pawn. A minor slip in technique, but the position is so winning it doesn't matter. White delivers a desperate check on f5, but this is also inaccurate and only speeds up the end. Slightly better was queen to b5 check, pawn to c6, queen to a6, queen to d1 check, and the king steps to f2. Instead, after the check played, queen to f5 check is easily met, and the end is near. With the win secured, Black's king becomes a hero, marching up the board to c6, then b5, and finally to c4, supporting the passed pawns while White's queen gives useless checks. Another feudal check from White with the queen to f7, but Black's king is perfectly safe. The king continues its incredible journey to c3. White's queen can only give more checks, but Black simply blocks with his own queen on d3. The king steps to b3. It's a small slip in an overwhelmingly winning position. The most precise was queen to d4 first. After a check on f3, the king steps to b2, queen to a8, and queen to Surior, and the pawns will roll. Instead, Anderssen plays the king to b3, which is still completely winning. White plays queen to b6 check, another inaccuracy in a lost position. There's nothing to be done. The final moves are played. The black king finds total safety on b2, while the passed a-pawn marches forward to a3, ready to become a new queen. White's final move is queen to b5 check, the last inaccuracy of a hard-fought game. Slightly more stubborn was queen to a6, pawn to Ansurior, king to f1, pawn to a2, and then a check on b5. But after the move played, the check on bool5 allows black to end the game immediately, and queen to bool3. This simple move forces a queen trade or allows a decisive attack, and with this, Morphy has seen enough. And with that, Paul Morphy resigns, and Adolf Anderssen takes the win. A spectacular game full of brilliant sacrifices and dramatic twists. White resigned because there is no defense. Here's what he saw. If the queen moves to a5, queen to c2 is check. The king is forced to f1. Queen to c4 is another check, and after the king moves to f2, black's pawns will queen, and it's all over.